Yeah, the Prime Minister, a government spokesperson, another government minister, all say today they're focused on delivering it. We're just not entirely sure what it is. So the option's still on the table: scrapping the leg of HS2 from Birmingham to Manchester, scrapping the leg from the outskirts of London to central London, or delays to one or other of those parts. The corners from which outrage has spilled has been many. Too many to mention. You're about to hear from one of them, the Mayor of Greater Manchester. But before that, here's Rishi Sunak sounding pretty non-committal.
Well, I'm not going to comment on that type of speculation, but what I would say is we're absolutely committed to levelling up and spreading opportunity around the country, not just in the north, but in the Midlands and all other regions of our fantastic country as well. And transport infrastructure is a key part of that, but not just big rail projects, also local projects, improving local bus services, fixing potholes. All of these things make a difference to people's day-to-day lives.
If they pull the plug on that investment, what it will mean is it will leave the north of England with Victorian rail infrastructure pretty much for the rest of this century, while the southern half of the country has new north-south and east-west lines, a modern rail system. And that is a recipe for the north-south divide to become a north-south chasm. And this is all in the Parliament when we were supposed to be the priority for investment, when we were supposed to be levelled up.
So we're still no clearer on when we'll get a decision. We did get a hint of what the decision might be, though. Earlier on this morning, the Prime Minister's spokesperson used a curious phrase. He said, "We've talked previously and previously announced decisions to rephase parts of the project because of affordability pressures." Many tonight saying rephase is doing a bit of heavy lifting there, and for rephase, read delays. Critics pointing out that in the long run, delays come with costs. When HS2 was first dreamt up, the estimate was £37.5 billion. The cost of the estimate at the moment, £100 billion. Kick this can further down the road, those delays could cost you much more than even that.
Paul McNamara there, thanks very much. Chris.
Well, the political battle over HS2 is so sharp, partly because it comes as the country's public finances are, of course, very tight. Many Conservative backbenchers would like to see tax cuts announced this autumn, but the government's rules on tax and spend make it hard to see how that can happen. Our economics reporter, Neil MacDonald, is with me. So how much room for manoeuvre is there?
Well, almost nothing. And even that may be about to disappear. And I think that sets the context for this row over HS2. So this is all about one of the Chancellor's cornerstone economic policies, which is about bringing down our national debt. And this graph I can show you is that total government debt as a share of our national income. Is it just coming to you, I hope? And the point about that is you can see it jumping after 2008 recession and then COVID and then the cost of living crisis. Jeremy Hunt wants that share to be falling in 5 years' time, and the latest forecasts from the budget suggest he just about makes it, but you're going to really have to stare hard to see it because the margin of error he meets it by is just £6.5 billion, which in the context of an economy our size is basically nothing.
Right, so why does HS2 matter in the light of that?
Well, because anything the government can do to reduce its borrowing in that 1 year helps you to meet that fiscal rule. And HS2 is currently getting through about £5 billion a year, so you can see how it might be tempting to just chop it. Tempting, but of course this is a project designed for decades, not for 12 months. And I think the government view is that they're not going to take the decision just to meet the fiscal rules, but that does not mean that HS2 is off the hook, because there's still a big discussion about whether the benefits of the scheme are still outweighed by the high and growing costs that Paul was alluding to. So
what else can the Chancellor do?
Well, the likelihood is that his fiscal position may get even worse this autumn when we get the next forecasts from the OBR. That £6.5 billion we showed you could well disappear entirely. Since those forecasts were done, we've had a higher inflation, higher interest rates than expected, and lower growth. So if the government isn't going to raise taxes, then we're talking about even more difficult decisions on public spending. And I think the reality is even scrapping HS2 would not change that fiscal arithmetic.
Thanks, Neil. Jackie.
Well, joining me now from Manchester is the City Council leader, Bev Craig. I mean, Bev Craig, as you heard there is a lot of speculation at the moment. Tell us what you understand is the position about HS2 right now.
Yeah, well, good evening. I think that's precisely the point. Today, myself and Greater Manchester's Mayor Andy Burnham wrote to the Prime Minister because all we've heard so far is rumour and speculation. So I run a city of 600,000 people and we're yet to hear anything further from government around whether or not they're genuinely considering scrapping this. Our message is really clear. To take a decision that scraps this leg of HS2 is political short-termism at its worst. Political short-termism that damages our country's economics in the long term. And we really need HS2, not just for the line and the benefits that it brings, but for the wider benefits to northern economies and our ability to build Northern Powerhouse Rail in full on top of that to get better east-west and north-south connections.
I mean, the reality for the government, when all of this began, the estimated cost was around £30 billion. Now it is being suggested it could be closer to £100 billion. It is right, isn't it, that at a really difficult time for the economy, the government has the right to say, hold on a minute, we want to look at this again.
Look, you would expect any government of any colour to properly manage and grip budgets that sit before them. There's two things that I'd say, though. The first is that if we'd started, as Manchester had suggested back in 2010, building north and moving south, we certainly wouldn't be having a debate as to whether or not a line that was meant to run from the north to central London left the north and entered central London. The second is that in terms of benefits, the most beneficial bit in terms of the public purse, in terms of return on investment, comes in the leg that we're talking about. It comes in the line from Manchester to Birmingham. So it really does seem a ridiculous idea that they would seek to save money in the short term when actually the scheme only adds up if you get it to Manchester.
I mean, for a Labour council leader, you're perhaps in unusual company at the moment. You have the former Chancellor, George Osborne, Tory grandee Sir Michael Heseltine, two Prime Ministers essentially backing your argument. How helpful are those interventions? Do you think they may make a difference?
I think massively, because what this shows is this isn't just a political argument. This is about the kind of plan that we want to see in this country. We haven't done long-term infrastructure particularly well. Here in Manchester, Manchester Piccadilly train station opened in 1840. 200 years later, we're talking about high-speed rail arriving to it. We've talked for a long time about better needs for connections east to west. Network Rail themselves say that it costs an extra £15 billion for the Powerhouse Rail to happen if they scrap HS2. So what this shows, at a time when the economy is struggling, that actually we should be taking a long-term view. We can increase the number of jobs, 96,000 jobs, we can grow the size of Greater Manchester's economy, and we can help businesses base themselves here in the UK, increase business confidence and grow the economy by taking long-term decisions.
I mean, it is easy to be on the outside talking about taking long-term decisions. The government would argue they've got to take decisions about the economy right now. I mean, the Prime Minister was asked directly about this today. Now, in truth, he didn't really answer the actual question he was asked, but he did say he remains committed to the levelling up agenda and that that commitment can be seen in a variety of different ways.
Look, I know, and the Prime Minister went on to talk about potholes and some basic services. Our message is really clear. The North needs this, Greater Manchester needs this, but the wider country needs this. To scrap HS2, and as a result then scrap Northern Powerhouse Rail as a consequence, really would be the final nail in the coffin for any claims of levelling up, in my view.
I mean, the difficulty for you, perhaps, is that your own party, Labour, have not categorically committed to this project either.
Look, I would be really clear, and Manchester's got a really long history of this. We will work with the party of the day to deliver the best for our city. This originated under Gordon Brown.
But if the party of the day is your own, and they won't commit to it either.
What I would say is that from the assurances I've had, the Labour Party is talking about Northern Powerhouse Rail in full and HS2, and I would make the same demands of a Labour government as I would of a Conservative government. The key thing, though, is that this is about a decision that sits in the hands of a Prime Minister now. What we're saying today is rather than fuelling rumours, speculation, drip, drip, drip in the media, have a grown-up conversation with this. That's why we sent our letter, and that's why we've said we've got some clear demands around how we can frame that discussion. But the coalition of voices, not just from the Labour Party, but deep within the Conservative Party, donors and businesses say that this is a decision that can't afford to wait. The Conservative government must act quickly to restore business confidence.
Bev Craig, thank you very much for talking to us this evening. Thank you.